Okay, hey guys. Welcome to the second episode of the Healthy Kids podcast. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start on a little mini series here, kind of a five-part thing. One of the things that Chinese medicine really excels at is kind of generalizing about people. And what we mean by that is looking at children's constitutions. What this means is, in a sense, personality structures. So in Chinese medicine, there are five basic personality structures, and each one has very specific strengths and weaknesses, and it even has physical diseases that they tend to get as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to unpack each of the five. We're going to talk about examples of different kids with different kinds of issues going on that surround those five. But what I'll try to do is to give you a sense of the five different personality types in Chinese medicine, how to parent them, what to feed them, things like this. Because guaranteed, any of you who have more than one kid, they're wildly different, aren't they? I mean, you just can't believe how different they are. Well, Chinese medicine will actually say that they are born that way. They are born different from each other. So it's not a parenting thing. One of your kids is pretty easygoing and, pretty relaxed, and the other one's real feisty and independent. And, often one is like one parent and one is like the other. And you're kind of stuck wondering, like, "Hey, what did we do with this one?" It's not you. The kids are born with sort of predilections. They're born with certain tendencies in their personality to be more independent, to be more sympathetic, to be more different things, more dreamy, whatever it'll be. So, what we want to do is we want to try to unpack these five different personality structures to help you to understand your kid, your child's strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately how to parent them. Because a lot of what I want to do is I want to outline what a child's strengths are. Because in the end, you want to parent to those strengths. You don't always want to parent to their weaknesses. Constantly disciplining them every time they do something wrong, it's no fun. If you can start to model for them, parenting them, talking to them, the way that you phrase things, the way that you approach them, if you can tailor that to each kid a little bit, this information here is going to help you get started on that process of understanding each kid individually, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what approach to take. Okay? So this is a lot of what I'm doing in my clinic. Parents will bring their kids in for various issues, ADHD or OCD or bedwetting. But in the end, we want to get on top of those physical things. And in the end, we want to see what the child's personality is like, so that as much as is possible in any given situation, I can help the parents to understand their child better. So even if they're just coming in for a cough, I still want to get to the bottom of their personality. So the more that I can describe the child to the parent, the more I can give information about what their child is like, what their strengths and weaknesses are, the more the parent can empathize, sympathize, understand their child when their child's having a hard time, especially, right? So when I have families coming into the clinic, I am so interested in this aspect of it, because it's more than just a cough. It's we love our kids and we want to give them the best, and this is just one step in that direction. So what we'll do is the next 5 episodes will be unpacking each of the 5 types. Okay, and today what we'll do is we'll start with wood. Okay, so the other day I had a parent bring in her 9-year-old son, and the chief complaint, or the main thing that she was bringing him in for, was just what she sort of said was dysregulation. That's how she started the conversation. So I'm kind of looking at the kid, and he doesn't really want to be here, but not from a shyness perspective. He's just kind of ignoring me, and he's kind of talking in a low, slightly whiny voice to his mom. He doesn't want to be here, this and that. He won't look at me. And just kind of the way he looks, I'm starting to be like, okay, he's dysregulated. I'm starting to wonder what's going on here. I'm thinking, okay, is he more frustrated type, or is this more of a shyness issue? What's going on here? So she proceeds to tell me, well, he's a real sharp kid, real bright, quite athletic. He's a really quick learner when he applies himself. His mind is really quick, and his body as well. very quick to move. So then it starts to unwrap a little bit here. So we're starting to ask some questions. He's quite easily frustrated, big emotions, and very sensitive along with that. So he'll be very sensitive and have very big reactions to relatively small things. He also tends to have big anger. So along with that frustration, and there's a very mild kind of trauma history there, nothing too extreme. They did, however, move a lot throughout his life. So he had known a number of cities and has had to move quite a bit throughout his life. So all of these things put together, I'm starting to paint a picture for myself. And through asking, I find out, he is even hitting at home, hitting his mom, hitting his dad, kicking and things like with his siblings and stuff. This isn't coming out quite as much at school, but even at school, it's happening a little bit. He also has a lot of impulse control issues. He says things that later he'll regret, but he says them and he keeps doing them. The impulse control very quickly came out in my clinic space as he gets more comfortable in my space, realizes that he's not going to be able to leave. He starts moving around my fairly small clinic room, and he starts looking at my toys that I have out and stuff. And he's kind of looking at them. He's just sort of exploring the space. But very quickly, he starts getting into drawers and things that have nothing to do with him, right? So he just starts going through drawers. And he's not only opening them and closing them, he's opening them very hard and kind of slamming them shut. And then when he finds something that he thinks is interesting, he'll just start pulling stuff out of there. Right. So I'm trying to talk to the mom. She's kind of half trying to discipline him while talking to me. And I'm sort of in the position of having to be like, well, look, bud, that's not something you can touch there. Like there's some somewhat expensive equipment in some of those drawers. And he's just kind of pulling it out because it looks to be the most interesting of the things. So here we have a kid who is curious. He's looking around in his space. He wants to know where he is. And to some degree, he's just bored and he wants to do something because he doesn't want to be here, right? So in talking to the mom, then asking about, so tell me about home behavior. So he's getting into very combative relationships with his siblings, so that's, like I said, the hitting and the kicking is coming out. Very combative relationships with both of the parents, same deal. A lot of the talking back, just generally oppositional behavior as a general rule. And so to some degree, though not as much, this is coming out at school. What's the bigger problem at school is more kind of focus and the impulsivity leading to kind of hyperactivity. So he's at school, but he's not paying attention. He's interrupting in class. He's just saying things, trying to be funny, and then he has a hard time with group work. So anytime he's put into a group to do a project, he kind of falls apart around it. He has a hard time sort of integrating himself into the group. He sort of wants to be in charge, but then doesn't make decisions that works for everybody. This is kind of the generality that the mom is giving me here. So all of these things put together, ultimately what happens is the teacher is complaining, saying, look, we've got some behavior issues here. And if we can't get this sorted out, something's going to have to happen. Some kind of change is going to have to occur here. And I mean, this is a common story. I've heard this story 1,000 times in my clinic all the time, right? This is classic hyperactivity, ADHD kind of things. Now, let me describe first what I think about this, because there's kind of two pieces to this. The first part is, of course, the hyperactivity, right? So just the moving through class and shooting up their hand all the time and trying to answer questions and talking out of turn, all these things. On some level, the hyperactivity doesn't necessarily bother me that much. I mean, I think a kid should be flexible enough in order to be able to sit through class for a reasonable amount of time and to stay on task and things. But at the same time, you get some kid who doesn't want to do that. I'm not necessarily blaming them at the age of 9, right? To have to sit there for a really long time. Also, on top of that, I don't know the teacher. So the teacher, might be having a hard time engaging him in a way that's helping. And, she's got a lot of kids in the class in a public school and doesn't have the time to cater to every kid in there. So I don't necessarily, the hyperactivity, the fidgetiness and those kinds of things, the distracted behavior, I don't necessarily mind that per se. Now, what I do mind and what I would call sort of a problem is more the emotional side of things. He's frustrated. There's anger issues. He's hitting, kicking, even biting at times, and then saying things, right? The combative relationships, the oppositional behavior to both kids and to adults, and not just adults in the house, but to some degree adults out of the house, not willing to listen. Although he would get into my stuff, the computer's sitting here, and he'll just walk up to the computer and start clacking the keys for no reason and stuff. And I told him to stop, kind of firm, and he did. So he was willing to listen to me at least. But it's worse in the house, but a little bit better out. So this is kind of a standard setup, right, for a kid with quote unquote hyperactivity, quote unquote ADHD. I've seen this kid 1,000 times, right? So then the question becomes, what am I thinking about when I see this kid? All right. So one way to think about this is in terms of what we would call the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, right? So parasympathetic is sort of that calm mindset, problem solving, taking care of business while staying calm. The sympathetic nervous system is what we call fight or flight, right? So this is the system in the brain that kicks in when there's kind of an emergency. So arboreal monkeys in the trees then go down to the ground to find beetles underneath dung patties. Well, now they're leaving themselves open to predation, right? So they're keeping their eyes open for lions and stuff. You see a lion, that's the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and that gets everything kind of ramped up to get ready to run, to fight or flight, right? Or freeze. We have this as well. But what I would say here that is going on for a kid like this is that they're sort of stuck in that sort of mode of thinking. That's what makes them so sensitive, right? That's what makes such large emotions, such big reactions to small things, because in the more complex human mind, then that fight or flight mechanism is designed to look for conflict, not just conflict that requires you to stay alive in an emergency situation when a lion is chasing you or you're driving on the freeway or something, but in the social mind of the human, then this gets moved into the realm of what did that person mean when they said that? Everything becomes, seen through the lens of conflict. Everything that you perceive then kind of moves through this lens first of seeing it, well, is this or is this not a conflict? And this is hard for kids to be in. Now, the thing about the way that the nervous system works in this case, especially with the with the sympathetic nervous system, this fight or flight mechanism, is that it works by what we call a threshold system, meaning, like for you, if your partner or your friend sends you a text that you don't like and it's kind of irritating, how many of those texts does that person have to send you before you kind of flip out? Because it can be irritating and you can't really control that, but then you act on it. At what point do you just go over the edge and then act on it? That's kind of your threshold. Oh, I had to get 10 annoying texts before I did it, So what happens is every time you act on that anger or irritation, it actually lowers your threshold a little bit for irritation. So then the next time your partner is annoying you, it doesn't take as many things for you to be very annoyed and then to act again, right? So then every time you kind of act, that threshold gets lower and lower, and it just gets easier and easier and easier, basically to fall into the sympathetic nervous system. So what I'm arguing here is that these kids are stuck kind of in this mind frame. Okay, and we'll get to why in a minute here. But let's say this, that what happens in the human body then is the brain perceives something stressful, something that is perceived as conflict. Then what happens is your brain sends the signal to the body, get ready. We're going to have to climb back up the tree rapidly. So your whole body kind of ramps up. But there's a funny thing in the human body where when your body starts to ramp up to get ready based on the brain's signaling, the body ramps up, and then the brain then is like, well, why are you ramping up? And then it starts to ramp up. So now you've got this situation where the brain perceives some stress. The body responds to that stress sort of evolutionarily the way we're supposed to respond to that. But then your brain is like, well, why are you responding? And then it kind of ramps up a little bit. And you kind of get into this back and forth where then they're both kind of ramping up all the time. And they're just sort of feeding each other, and you're sort of making everything go up. So When I look at these kids from my perspective, this is what I see. I see essentially a kid who is stuck in a stressful mode. So we think about it in terms of like brain chemistry, or sort of we sort of say in a general way brain pathways. So they're sort of, every time something stressful comes up, their brain, from a neuroplasticity perspective, is just used to using the same pathways every time, which is conflict. Let's resolve this stress through conflict rather than calm problem solving. So they're kind of stuck in that mode of always solving everything through a large reaction, right? So whether they're kind of creating a conflict out of something, or whether they're just themselves, just conflicted within themselves, having a large emotional reaction, big emotions, right? Well, the way that I view my responsibility in this situation as an acupuncturist, as an herbalist, is to look at these kids and say, okay, where I can intervene in this situation is through herbs and acupuncture, which is to say, what I'm doing is I'm, in a sense, calming that physical response. So the brain is reading something as stressful, the body is responding, but through a series of acupuncture treatments, through a series of taking herbs every day at home, what happens is the body begins to respond less. And so what happens then is the brain isn't being further pushed. And the way you know this is happening is you can just see in the kid that they're more reasonable, that they don't, that they don't have such a big reaction to things. When they do have a big reaction, it's not as big. And when they do have their reaction, they recover faster. They're more flexible. It's time to stop doing this, it's time to doing that, time to do this. And the parent is bracing for the reaction, and the reaction doesn't come. So these are the kinds of things that start to tell me that the kid is doing better, right? That we're making that move. So my responsibility in this situation is to calm the physical aspect of the nervous system, to give the brain a chance. Because one thing that I learned over the years, 18 years of doing this, something that they sort of tried to tell me in school, but it took me a while to get, which is that the brain, the body, is always trying to heal itself. The brain always wants, the body always wants to heal itself. So that's normal, right? We're thinking about the immune system. Of course the body wants to heal itself. There's a virus in the mix. And what does the body do? The immune system, this exquisite chemical cascade kicks in, and the body heals itself. But this is also true in the brain. The brain is also always trying to find a balance point if it can. So then in this case, if I can get the body's response to some degree out of the way, then the brain has a chance to heal itself. The brain has a chance to find different pathways to use. It wants to use parasympathetic pathways. That's what the brain wants to do. That's its preference. So if I get that influence out of the way, then the brain can start to move in that direction. And again, from a neuroplasticity point of view, the more that brain does that, the more the brain uses a problem-solving mindset in the face of stress, the more it will continue to do that. And so then the second side of this is kind of, what's the parent's responsibility in this situation? Because what I always find here is the parents are always stuck in what I think of as kind of like the discipline spiral. So the kid's behavior is ramping up, and the parents are responding by increasing the discipline, increasing the interventions, increasing the lecturing, to try to curb that behavior. Okay? But in reality, what research has shown, and what every parent's experience has shown who's come in to me with this issue, is that doesn't really work. Increasing the discipline, it doesn't work. And this is for various reasons, which, again, we're going to get into in a minute here. But the more that the child is able to be calm in the face of stress, the more that the parents can reinforce that behavior with new parenting styles. Okay, so in the case of the kid that I saw recently, I think that part of his situation was that they had moved quite a bit. There was a bit of trauma in his past, so it had kind of those kinds of changes are stressful for kids. Change is stressful for kids, right? So parents who are splitting up, moving to a different city, even like an older sibling going to school. I've seen kids get quite stressed by this situation. So new things, change in general can be a form of stress, and then the kid has to sort of figure out how they're going to respond to this stress. So the parents, then we have a conversation about how they can manage their child and what is it specifically about his personality that may require them to shift their parenting style, first of all, away from a disciplinary style. But even at the best of times, these kids can be a handful. They need boundaries, right? All kids need boundaries, but especially these kids, they need to know what the boundaries are, and they need to know when they've crossed the boundaries. So then you're asking yourself, how do I let a child know that they've crossed a boundary without feeling like I have to break out the heavy-handed discipline? So what's this balance point here? Okay. Let me describe these kids too, because part of what I want to do here, the thing that over the years was so strongly imprinted on me about these kids was that, so for those of you out here who have one of these kids, that 99% of the stuff they do is just them kind of being excited. It's like their misbehavior, quote unquote, is really just an extension of them just being kind of really excited about the circumstance. Like, even, you see these kids, they'll like go up to a kid and try to give him a hug, and then maybe the kid doesn't really want that hug, and so they pull away. So then this kid really, the sort of quote unquote hyperactive kid, starts hanging on them and pulling on their shirt, and it just gets worse and worse, and the other kid's at this point screaming or something like that. But if you really look at it, the kid doing the hugging, this kid, meant well. They just wanted to do something. What did they want to do? They wanted to interact. Okay? These kids really require interaction. They thrive on interaction. And when I said they require interaction, I mean it. These kids really only work well when they're relating to others. And let me describe the reason for this. In Chinese medicine, we have this notion about there being basically kind of 5 basic core personality structures in humans. And what we're going to do over the next 5 episodes here is we're going to unpack each of the 5 types in Chinese medicine. And this is according to this so-called 5-element theory, 5-phase theory. And what we're talking about here with this particular kid is we're talking about something called what we call the wood type. Now, the wood type, this word wood gets used because it's a reflection, it's a description of nature. And if you think about what nature is this organism, let's say, one big organism made up of many, many organisms that lives on top of the earth. So the earth is this thing, and then nature lives on top of that. Now, the earth itself doesn't need nature in order to exist. I mean, just think about the moon or something like that. That's a rock that doesn't need any life on it to exist. The earth can exist without nature, but nature cannot exist without the earth, and nature no single part of nature can exist on its own. They only exist because of their relationships to others. Okay? And so when I talk about these kids requiring interaction, seeking interaction, what are we talking about? We're talking about attention-seeking behavior. Everything they do starts to be interactive seeking behavior, interaction seeking behavior, attention seeking behavior, right? I actually prefer the word interaction. It has a certain neutrality to it. Attention, it is attention, but I think really what they're seeking is interaction, okay? So one thing that I like to do here, and this is something that I like to send the parents away with, is this notion of what Chinese medicine sees in these kids. Because what happens is when the kid starts to kind of just go down that road of quote unquote hyperactivity, oppositional defiance disorder, whatever it is, these frustration issues and these anger issues that I'm concerned about, we start to sort of parent to their weaknesses. And what does this mean? We're parenting to their weaknesses. We're parenting to the quote unquote misbehaviors, the things that they do quote unquote wrong, right? You can see that I don't love to use these labels, but this is descriptive language here. So as that kid moves down that pathway, the parent starts to see their kid only through that lens. And it's difficult to sort of claw your way back when all you see of your kid is sort of the things that are difficult. It's not so hard to lose vision of kind of who our kid really is. So let me describe to you exactly sort of the way that I talk to my parents when I'm talking to them about their kids. And this is by way of trying to impress upon them not only that there are these emotions like anger and frustration, but let's try to figure out exactly where they're coming from. Because remember, I said that most of the time with these kids, when they're getting into trouble, they're just kind of genuinely excited. Not all the time, but a lot of the times it's just them kind of just being a little too much, a little extra, as the kids say, right? So then if that's true, then what we're really talking about here is trying to flip the script on how the parents view their kids, so that rather than always feeling like they're parenting to their weaknesses, always having to employ discipline to deal with misbehaviors, so that's what I'm calling their weaknesses, instead the parent can start to slowly flip the script in their own brain and start to work towards parenting to the child's strengths. Okay. In Chinese medicine, we have this view of these so-called wood-type kids, these sort of what we call woody kids. And these woody kids in Chinese medicine, to use a cultural description in China, they would say, they're like the general. Okay, what does this mean? The general. The general is in charge of the army. So let's say in ancient China, the emperor points over somewhere and says, I would like that piece of real estate. Then the general has to be like, well, okay, I get that. Okay, how do we do that? So then the general has to think of all the logistics. So what's happening there is the general is looking into the future, has a goal, and then executes on that goal. So that's why these kids then, what's their deal? They are always having an agenda, aren't they? These are like agenda kids. They got something they want and they want to move towards that. And that's so much, that's probably 100% of the issues that we encounter when we're dealing with these kids is this problem of them having a desire and not being able to go towards that, right? So if you think of that in an adult, that could be a great quality. Did you know that there's people in the third world that don't have clean water? We should fix that problem. Let's get some money together. We'll get the people. We'll get the resources we need to drill wells and create filters. In an adult, that's a leadership quality, moving forward, seeing into the future that we could fix a problem. That's the general. These kids, this is their bread and butter. They have a desire and they want to move towards that. Now, of course, they're kids, so sometimes the desire is a little nebulous and the steps to get to it are a little nebulous. Like getting kids to follow steps and to do something is difficult. Just getting them to pack their backpacks in the morning is impossible. What do you need for the day? I don't know. So it's not like this system is working so well in them, but that is the reason why they end up frustrated. Have you ever had a bad boss? What's the deal with the boss? The boss is the general. They have a vision, how the company needs to move forward. And what does a boss do? What does a general do? They basically just deal with problems all day. What do you mean we don't have enough boots for the troops? What do you mean we don't have widget A for blah, blah? Well, okay, okay, let's get it here. Okay, you got it? Okay, go. Next person comes in with a problem. They just put out fires all day. That's problem solving. Right? So when they're at their best, this, like I said, this is their bread and butter. This is what they do all day. But when they get dysregulated, when they get unhealthy, then that starts to flip into things like frustration, right? I want something and I can't get there, so now I'm frustrated. Okay? And that just keeps going forward. They're irritable, they're frustrated. Then that starts to turn into anger issues. Then that starts to turn into biting, kicking, like violence issues. And that, over time, with enough of that kind of influence, enough of that frustration over time, that starts to build. Okay, so these are kids with an agenda. They want to move towards that agenda. So they are independent kids. They are independent thinkers on the one hand. They want to do things their way, right? But on the flip side of it, socially, they're interesting because they're weirdly confident about strange things. I could be working on complex machinery and my 4-year-old will come up to me and be like, Papa, can I help you with that? I'm like, well, it's a little tough. No, I could do it. It's like, you're 4. Why would you think that? It's beautiful. I love it. But at the same time, it's a little funny, right? But on the other hand, then a lot of the times these kids are socially lacking in confidence, right? They're so sensitive. Every small thing is like a slight. And I think to some degree it's because these kids, and this gets a little abstract, but these kids sort of lack a clear sense of self. They define themselves more by their relationships. You think about adults that who are like this, and it's very common. They don't necessarily have strong ideas one way or the other necessarily about everything. They don't have such strong ideas about themselves. These are people who are often on the spiritual path. They see a goal and they want to move towards that. So there's a fundamental imbalance built into the system. And what we would say in Chinese medicine is, in fact, of all these 5 types, is that these kids, these adults, you're born that way. This is not something that is this is not something that is sort of inculcated into the system by the parenting. No, these children are born this way. The parenting then makes them either healthy in that circumstance or unhealthy in that circumstance. And I'm talking about, are they problem-solving kids, generally happy, or are they frustrated? Are they suffering in some way? Then all that anger stuff comes out. So that's where the parenting comes into play. But these kids are going to be the way that they are. Incredibly smart, incredibly socially intelligent, very sensitive, right? As adults, they're really good with other people, which is what makes them such good leaders. When these people are adults and they're healthy, they read people almost supernaturally good at it, strangely good at understanding people. I see what you mean, because when somebody talks, they suddenly just divine what the other person means by saying. They consult that person's internal dictionary. They don't consult their internal dictionary. But when these people get unhealthy, what do? They consult their internal dictionary for everything. So you ever gotten in an argument with this person? What happens? You get into an argument and they're stuck on the semantics. They're saying, yeah, but you said this to me. And then you're sitting there going, yeah, but that's not... I know I said that word, but that you have to understand that, what I mean is this. It doesn't, that you said that word. And it's like, yeah, but I'm telling you that, and they're stuck in their own heads using their dictionary to translate everything that they're hearing, rather than looking outwards and translating using other people's dictionaries. When they're healthy, they're really, really good at reading other people. When they're not, they're impossible, right? In a sense. So this is what I'm trying to do, is help parents to understand their children, to sort of flip the script in their brains on how they see their kids so that they can start to parent to their strengths. These kids, I said, they have vision. They see into the future and they want to move towards some desired end. These kids are problem solvers. As adults, when you encounter this person, you say to them something like, I'm having some money issues. And the person says, okay, well, what are we going to do? I see what the problem is. How are we going to solve this? They're instantly on the problem solving kick. Someone else might just be like, oh, honey, and just give you a hug. But they won't have anything to say about what to do and how to move forward. They'll just give you a hug and did you eat yet? Come over. We'll just relax, and we'll think about this later. So different personality types, right? These kids have vision. These adults have vision. They're creative. They're highly, highly creative. So, for example, in this case of a boy, these kids tend to be kinesthetic learners. They learn by doing, working with their hands. All this audiovisual stuff like worksheets, they can do it. They're smart enough, but that's not their ideal. These kids are incredibly creative working outdoors. They're incredibly creative working indoors. These kids need projects that they like, projects that they're genuinely excited about, things that they like. So this is where the parents really have to watch their kids carefully and with subtlety. What is my kid genuinely excited about? And then help that kid to move in that direction, right? Something, because these kids are only driven by what they want to do. If they want to do it, you can't stop them. If they don't want to do it, forget it, right? We all know. So these kids they have vision for the future. They have agendas. They have creativity. These kids can be great artists, great thinkers, creative thinkers, right? Leaders, pioneers even. These kids, when they're healthy, they're flexible. They're adaptable. New problems come up. Okay, we'll figure that out. When they're unhealthy, of course, no flexibility, no adaptability. These kids are good. These adults are good with decision making, being assertive, right? Courage to make a decision about something. These kids are really good at this when they're healthy. These adults are really good at this when they're healthy, right? And above all of that, when the wood type is healthy, they are kind. They want to help. All of these things, when they're really healthy and well aligned, all of these skills, all of these strengths that they have really are meant to be used for helping others. At their core, this is what they daydream about, is interacting with others and helping them, helping other people to be at their best. Now, of course, we also like to take the credit for it and all these things, but at their best, it's what they want is to be kind and benevolent, and this is a true sign of health. So you'll see in these kids, even when they're sort of struggling with frustration, sometimes they are just as accommodating and sweet and easy and helpful. They're just standing there helping little kids with painting or something. They're like the perfect little babysitter, and then other times forget about it. Right? So you see both sides of these kids at all times. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about what am I trying to do in this situation? I'm trying to help the parent to see their kid for their strengths. So what I'm doing is I'm reducing the amount of reaction the kid has. Then the parent has a little space now. The parent can say, okay, how can I shift my parenting style a little bit? And then how can I send my kid out into the world to do things that they're genuinely excited about, right? So is it jujitsu? Is it a science class? Is it surfing? What is it that kid wants to do? They just want to be outside, maybe. These kids are number one in terms of needing open-ended nature play. Being outside in a situation where they can be infinitely creative in nature, that's where these kids really thrive. That's the first thing. Just getting them outdoors, getting them off of their machines, off of their stuff. Because ultimately these kids are also, because they seek interaction, these kids get the most addicted to their tablets, to their media. And these kids are the last kids that should be on media. These kids really need to be off of it, and they crave it, they want it, they will fight for it. You got to have good boundaries around this because it is not healthy for these kids. Because all it does is stir up their insides, and their insides it's more stress coming in. Remember, all media is always designed to keep you paying attention. The system of your brain that is, in a sense, not the best, but the most efficient at sort of paying attention to something in the short term is your sympathetic nervous system, because you're looking for a lion. Is it going to eat me? Where is it? That's the system that all of this digital stuff plays upon. That's why when they're watching something, the screen is constantly switching. That is causing their brain to switch. It keeps them in the sympathetic system. It keeps them paying attention. So for these kids, I'm trying to get them out of that sympathetic mode. And everything about the world is trying to keep them in that mode. So we have to find ways to get them to move forward, but in a way that's calm. Lecturing isn't going to do it. The thing with lecturing is they don't hear it. What sounds rational to you just sounds like garbage to them. It's just Charlie Brown adult stuff. All they hear when you lecture these kids is that they're not good enough. Because remember, I said when these kids misbehave, it's really it's entirely because they're excited. So when we start lecturing them about something they did, what they hear is, you were excited, that's who you are, and that's no good, right? Now, of course, there need to be boundaries. So what do we mean here by boundaries? We mean that there needs to be some way where you can let them know clearly what the boundaries are without being too heavy-handed. My solution for this has been for years, and I've seen this work quite well, is parenting these kids is obviously different from other kids, and one skill that I've seen that can work really well, number one, never parent these kids when you're angry. Why is this? What is anger designed to do on one level? Anger is designed to break a relationship. That's kind of what it's good for in a lot of ways. It's designed to help you see a truth and then to act on that truth. If you have ever been in a bad relationship and you spent a lot of time trying to work it out, you spent a lot of time thinking it was you or something like that, then finally you get fed up, the anger comes out, and it suddenly dawns on you that it has nothing to do with you, that it's entirely the other person's behavior that's the problem here. And once you have that realization, there's no going back. It is broken. That relationship is broken. How many times have you ended something in that state of mind? That's what the anger's for. It showed you the truth of the thing and gave you the strength to stop, to move away from that situation. So the problem is when we parent with anger, with irritation, subtly or not so subtly, that's what we're doing to our kids, is we're breaking the relationship. We're severing that relationship. And this is the last kid that needs to be severed. This is the last kid that needs to be pushed away, because all they are crying out for is interaction. Now, we all do it. It's fine. If you mess up, then the key to that situation is the reconnect. You got to just go back, apologize for your part. Don't tell them that they also have a part to play. You just go and apologize for sorry, honey, I shouldn't talk to you that way. I am sorry. And leave it at that. Okay? They know. It's okay. The second piece that I find has been very helpful here is a way of disciplining, which is it shows what the boundary is without being too heavy-handed. So let's say two siblings are playing, and as a parent, you kind of know when things are starting to ramp up. You start to kind of hear it, right? You sort of see it, and you can see that this kid is kind of provoking the other kid or whatever. The key there is always to try to stay a step ahead of this kid. So then you just provide a little discipline in kind of like a, hey, we don't act like that. All right, bud? So what you're doing there is you're just giving a very light reminder, a light touch on the kid, just letting them know, hey, I see what you're doing. And you're giving them attention. You're letting them know that they're crossing a boundary. But the key here then is you have to take your attention completely off the kid and let them make the choice. These kids thrive on choices. They need to be the one making the choices. They need to be in charge of their world. So it's okay to let them know what the boundary is, but the ideal here is to let them know and then completely take your attention away from it and let them make a new decision. Let them choose to do it correctly. If you take that decision away from them by intervening between two kids, taking your kid away, maybe they're playing by themselves, but they're messing something up, and you pick them up and pull them away, or you take something away from them, that's you intervening and not giving them a choice. You're taking the choice away. And these kids are not good when the choice is taken away. That's control. And these kids don't like to be controlled, right? So that combination of sort of not parenting when you're angry, so tag teaming if you can, or just swallow it. It's okay. It's not a big deal. And then a light touch of discipline and taking your attention away. Of course, if they go back to doing the same thing, I'll ramp up the light touch, it'll become a medium touch. I'll raise my voice a little bit. Hey. And if they do it a third time, okay, now there's consequences. We got to figure out what that is. But what you want to do is get it to where you just say the boundary and they follow in line. They fall in line there. Okay. So this now, there's so much more to say about these kids, but this is the general look of things. What I do in the clinic is I try to help the parent to see their kid from a more whole picture, a more holistic picture, to see both sides of the coin here. So what constitutes quote unquote bad behavior is really just good behavior kind of flipped. It's just them being a little overexcited and it turns into a whole other thing. Now, the degree to which anger and frustration and violence is coming out, yeah, right, this is a problem. But it really is just an outgrowth of that desire to interact. If they can't get the interactions one way, it ramps up and it turns into interactions of another kind. Okay? So, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm thinking about. When I give kids herbs, I expect to start to see changes within a few weeks. How big the changes are, that's harder to predict. But I expect to start to see some measurable changes. You know what's really useful here is to keep third parties sort of blinded in a sense. Like, don't tell the teachers that you're doing something different. Let them tell you that the child has improved, and then you really know. Because if they know about it and they're looking for changes, you don't get the best out. They look for the change, and then so they tend to underplay whatever is going on. So any caregiver, grandparents, teachers, whoever, any extracurricular activities they're involved in, have the parent hold that person in the dark from the treatment, and then go back to them 2, 3, 4 weeks later. Hey, how's little Johnny doing? Is he okay? See how things are going. Okay, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I do. If you guys know any kids that are struggling with hyperactivity, I really feel for these kids. I want to treat them. Because if we can get on top of that nervous system issue now, if we can get their brains working correctly now, that prevents a whole lot of problems later. Because when that 9-year-old becomes a 16-year-old, becomes a 26-year-old, it's this lack of self-confidence combined with a desire to interact. That's not the best combo. That's when they start picking interactions that don't serve them, that ultimately are sort of bad choices. And so that's what I'm trying to prevent here. And the earlier you catch these kids, 9 years old is fantastic to catch these kids. The earlier you catch them, the bigger the change will be, and they will hold that change as much as is possible, because you are changing the way their brain is working. You're causing the brain to wear in a new groove. And that new groove then becomes the new foundation by which they move forward. Of course, if the parenting situation, if the circumstance situation just keeps pushing them back, you're kind of fighting against that a bit. But as much as you can, as much as I can, I want to push them forward to be calmer, more relaxed, and they carry that change into their adulthood. And this is what I am most interested in terms of Chinese medicine, is changing kids now, their physiology, their neurochemistry. If I can change that as much as possible now, they will hold those changes into adulthood and be happier adults. Be more effective adults. And this is my passion. This is what I think about when I see these kids. I see them in school now. I see them in 20 years. The whole thing is laid out in front of me. I've been at it long enough now where I have kids who are older, much older, and I've seen that change in their lives because they come back to me as young adults, and I see the difference. I talk to them. They're relatively calm, relatively relaxed. All their best qualities, all that creativity, all that vision, all that kindness, that's what's coming out. There's a real sweetness to them that I didn't see when they were a kid. Or that it's hard to see it when they're a kid, but it is there. And the more we can parent to that kid, that part of their personality, the more we can help them in that way, the happier they will be, and the happier I will be. All right, guys. take it easy. If you know any of these kids, I would love to see them. Again, I'm doing telehealth, so I'm treating all over the nation. I'm mailing herbs to Jersey and Florida and sometimes to Canada, wherever. And if you ever want to come into the clinic, I'm always happy to see you here as well. All right, guys, take it easy. Stay healthy.